Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness to all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have a repeat guest speaker who we haven't had for a long time on our show, Tania Gomez. Hello Tania.
Hi Debbie, so nice to be back. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, look, we've got lots to talk about. We have actually seen you in recent times, but we haven't had you as a guest. I think we've actually only had you as a guest once officially, and then we did a couple of episodes when we were doing the recording that you were setting up.
Yeah, Teams Remastery.
That was all a couple of years ago. So it's been some time. There's been a lot happening over the last couple of years. Obviously, we know that. From the SDA world, it's changed drastically, but just in general from the NDIS provider world, it has also been getting a lot tougher, and you're very much involved in the provider world in general with your consultancy business. Do you want to just give us a really quick overview of Tania Gomez Consulting?
Yeah, so
Before we start.
So my mission is to help NDIS providers be audit ready always. So to have great systems and processes in place that they could go through an audit at any point in time. And then as part of that, to help people do that, our mission is to help educate, inspire and connect providers. So we do that with events, we do that with coaching programs, we do that with our podcast and a whole lot of other information. We've just released our first book. And so all of that is about really getting information to providers, really similar to what you guys do for the SDA providers, but are kind of from a quality and compliance lens, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So a new book, that's exciting.
Yeah, I wrote a book called Future-Proofing Your NDIS Business. There's 11 co-authors and we all talk about different angles. It's broken into 3 parts around people, the heart of your business, systems, and then innovation, and how to use those 3 things to make sure your business is here for a long time.
Great. That's awesome. That leads right into what we want to talk about today, because the issue at hand is proving very challenging for many providers out there, from what we understand. And that is the pricing arrangements, the NDIS pricing arrangements. Now, these are updated every year that take effect from the 1st of July. The most recent one, obviously, it came out some weeks ago to take effect just over a week ago. But there has been a lot of consternation and cause for distress in the industry because of changes or lack of changes, lack of increases to pricing that are seeing providers finding it much harder to actually run their business. Do you want to talk us through basically what's going on?
Yeah. Look, it's a really tough time to be a provider. And so I guess a recap is that the biggest people hit in this year were support coordinators and plan managers. For the 6th or 7th maybe year in a row, they didn't receive any increase. And so no CPI increase, no increase for anything. And as costs are going up, electricity, staffing, superannuation, it's actually not having an increase actually is a cut in what they're paid. And so we feel for support coordinators and plan managers. And we have already, since the last pricing arrangements, we saw 600 support coordinators close their door because there wasn't an increase last time. So it is really tough out there. Support coordinators and plan managers have additional, the other thing for plan managers is they were paid under 2 fees. They were paid an establishment fee to set up a client, and then they're paid a ongoing fee. And the ongoing fee stayed the same, but their setup fee was also cut. So they've kind of been hit. And there was also regional and rural allowances removed from plan managers. So they had a cut in real terms. Then we had a real hit for allied health professionals. The agency or the response has said that it's been a correction of an overpayment to allied health, but we've had a number of professions under allied health had an hourly rate cut. So I think it was physios and dietitians received a $5 or $10 an hour cut, as well as the really worrying thing is the regional and remote loadings being removed and then travel time. So the NDIS practice standards say that therapy should be delivered inside the natural environment of the participant. So if you have a child with a language delay or a cognitive delay and they're receiving therapy, having that therapy in their school or in their home is a lot more effective than having it in a clinic because they're more relaxed and it's actually more applicable to the environment. They can involve the teachers, they can involve the school, they can involve other people in the natural environment to make it more effective long term. But by cutting the travel allowance by 50%, it just means that it's not actually possible for allied health to get out there and deliver the supports that they really need to. So I've been working with a number of the peak bodies. We have the Australian Physiotherapy Association, Dietitians Australia, the Podiatry Association, the Psychology Association, the social workers and behaviour support practitioners have come together and we put up a petition against the cuts, and we've had 56,000 people so far sign our petition, and we've had a lot of responses from MPs. We don't have the first sitting week of Parliament, I believe, is the 21st of July, so we haven't been able to raise it in Parliament yet, but that is the aim, is to at least get the 50% travel. We really, really think that needs to change, and we really need to have a look at, my catchphrase since the election has been fund care like it matters, because at the moment we're making it really hard for providers to actually run quality organisations. And we have the agency who's clamping down on payments. At the same time, we have the other regulator, the Commission, increasing compliance requirements. So there's requirement to do more, and yet you're being paid less. And so there's since the pricing announcements have gone out, I've seen about 10 to 20 allied health professionals that have withdrawn from NDIS. It's just simply not viable for them to continue running a business in this space. And we're already at a shortage. We already have people that have OT in plans that can't get OTs, and many other of the allied health as well. So it's quite scary what's happening.
Yeah, look, I've been hearing this at different events I've been going to. Certainly the SIL Summit that you held in Brisbane that we were at a couple of months ago now, I think, and just other events and the talk amongst providers. So specifically, we know that support coordinators and plan managers have really suffered in getting no increases for years running now. Do you think this is the NDIS starting to try and work in the phasing out of those two businesses, operations?
My personal opinion is yes. My personal opinion is that they don't value or want to fund support coordination or plan management. I think from reading many different reports, I guess the reading between the lines tells me that both plan management and support coordination are on their way out. They have suggested that they are building a big computer system that will replace plan managers. And they have said that they're replacing support coordinators with navigators, which will be not a provider. You won't apply to the Commission to be a navigator as such. It'll be like an LAC. It'll be a tender to a non-government organisation for a period of years. And my personal somewhat jaded, sceptical opinion is that having a good support coordinator really dictates how much funding you receive. A good support coordinator can get double the amount of funding for a participant that a not so good support coordinator can get because they know the system and they can work the system. And support coordinators have been told very clearly not to advocate for participants, but the people doing the work are social workers or people who, care deeply about people with disability, and they have made it their mission to help participants get what they rightly deserve. And that has cost the system a lot of money. So by removing support coordinators and moving them to more of a tender arrangement that's probably going to be run similar to an LAC or similar to like the DES program It'll be based on KPIs, and therefore, they won't be advocating as much for more funding for participants, which will also help them to cap it at 8% financial growth, which is their financial target. So I think, sadly, the days of the NDIS trying to provide high-quality supports to people with disability are kind of over. It's really now focusing on cost controlling, which is really forgetting the human impact of what it means when you cut rates. So by cutting support coordinators, it does mean less access to the NDIS, and so I think that's kind of the plan.
Yeah, look, I heard something recently about talk that the NDIS wanted to turn it into more of a Medicare system. Do you think that is also sort of the way this is heading?
Yeah, I think so. Look, there's pros and cons to that, right? Medicare works quite well, but Medicare is also a much more mature scheme. NDIS is still only between 11 and 13 years as a scheme. We've got a lot to do. Like anyone who uses PACE or PROTA or MyPlace, any of those systems knows the bugs and the challenges. And in a scheme that has so much change, it's going to be hard to get to that point. I think it would be great to get to a point where it worked as well as Medicare. I think the devil, and I'm not against that, I think that just the devil's in the detail of what does that actually mean? Because with Medicare, you have a doctor who's medically qualified to make the call on how are they charging and what does that person need medically, and they bill that accordingly. It's also time related, but with the NDIS, every disability is so different that some services don't have qualified people at the level of doctors who can make that call. And by having a demand-driven system across very many different professions, how exactly do you do that? Like support coordinators actually do that now. Support coordinators and plan managers both play very important parts of making sure that participants get the right supports. And plan managers tell me that they stop millions of dollars of fraud before it even gets to the NDIS by reviewing things manually. So if those two mechanisms aren't there, how do we get to a Medicare system? What is the way we transition to that without assuming that all people with X disability receive X? Because people are unique and their disabilities are unique. And someone with autism, level 3 as an example, and the next person with autism level 3 could have completely different needs and plans and goals. And if we move to a Medicare system, does that mean we're removing the person-centered side of the NDIS?
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. And as you said, it is still in its infancy in some ways, the NDIS, and there is so far for it to go to get to a system, a point where it is working. And I know they're still trying to figure it all out, whether they're doing it as well as they could be, probably not. But look, we talked about support coordinators, plan managers, allied health professionals. Let's pivot to the SIL area.
Yeah.
And I know that SIL providers are also facing a lot of problems in funding, in making their income work, to having a viable business. Obviously, you're holding these SIL summits around the country, so you've been talking to so many different SIL providers as well. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so SIL is 80% of my clients are SIL, so I have more conversations with SIL providers than anybody else. And the pricing arrangements didn't affect them that badly, but what does affect them is the flawed design of the disability worker cost model, which is how their payments are worked out. It's really clear that NDIS wants to move to 1-to-3 ratio. So what that means is they want to move to having 1 support worker to 3 participants. And as we know, it's really hard to get participants who want to live with 2 other people in the same area without having a whole lot of challenges. And so people who were previously funded on 1-on-1 or 1-to-2 supports have been moved to a 1-to-3 funding, simply because the calculator says that works better financially. And that puts a lot of risk on the provider, because they know that this person needs more support. They need somebody, it might be to get in and out of bed. It might be to be on life-saving ventilator machines or other machines that keep them alive. And they know that they can't have 1 person on 3 participants and do it safely. So they're left then with either having to fund that out of their own pocket, or put a participant at safety risk. And so most providers actually just wear the difference themselves. They still staff it correctly because they want to meet their employers' responsibilities to not leave their staff at risk, especially if it's someone with complex behaviours. It's just not safe to have them in 1 to 3, especially during some times of the days where there might be heightened behaviours or certain triggers that occur. And the other thing is that when it gets to coroner's court, someone dies and it gets to coroner's court, the owners of those businesses are personally, criminally, and civilly liable. And so if you have record and evidence that this person needs one-on-one support and you're providing 1-on-2 because it's funded at 1-on-2, we haven't seen that get to court, but I'd be very interested in seeing what the outcome is in that case. If the NDIS has funded it at 1-on-2 or 1-on-3, are we saying that is what they need? Because medically that might not be the case in all situations. I've heard and seen more participants being surrendered to hospital in the last 6 to 12 months than I've ever seen, especially very high risk complex behaviour where they aren't being funded correctly or their funding has simply run out and they're being surrendered to hospital as their only way to manage the challenging behaviours because there's just not enough funding to provide the supports in a SIL environment. So the risks are really huge. When we're talking about people's lives quite literally, we're not talking about we're not talking about people wanting, providers wanting to earn more to be more profitable, to have nicer holidays themselves or to have bigger salaries. We're actually talking about keeping people alive. And it's a little bit hard for me to palate when you look at the NDIA CEO's $800,000 paycheck and that she has 8 deputy CEOs and the amount of money in that, or the fact that they've spent millions of dollars on fraud investigations that has turned back a tiny amount in return for the fraud that they found. So there's so much other wastage on the scheme to actually cut supports to people who need it. It makes me feel quite physically sick to my stomach.
Yeah, look, it does. And we're hearing the same thing, that participants ending up back in hospitals because they can't be supported. We're hearing more of that all the time.
And also, if you look at the cost of that, right, a hospital bed is $1.5 a day. All a provider's asking for might be $200 extra a day. So they're happy to say, and this is the problem with the state versus the federal. The hospitals are funded by the state. So the federal are like, make it a state problem. And state is obviously like, hang on a second, we're not okay with this. But it's that push and pull between state and federal government. And
we had a podcast that I was just listening to this morning, very recent one, Min and I recorded the open letter from Catalin Jacques. And we were talking about the commoditization of participants. And that's exactly what seems to be happening. There's no consideration of them as human beings in some cases with these decisions that seem to be coming out of the NDIS.
And there was a newspaper article this week that showed that the CEO of the NDIA heard on 2GB that a participant was rorting the system, and without even looking into it, demanded that within that day the participant be removed from the scheme. Didn't look into it. It turned out not to be true. It went through a review, the ART, and was found that they actually had underspent their plan. They had not rorted, but 2GB, they convicted them, and the NDIA CEO took it into her own hands to decide to remove them with no further evidence. It wasn't investigated. It wasn't look at this. It was, I want this done as a matter of priority. And so that just really shows that a human working with another human would actually want to know that that person had done the wrong thing, actually go through a due diligence process before removing funding that has been proven previously to be reasonable and necessary and required to support a person with disability. So yeah, it's I really do think we're going to see the removal of the CEO any day. I think it's coming. There's been too much. There's been too much silence from the board, too much silence from the ministers, too much silence from the CEO. And this is the same CEO who also told us she wasn't reading any of the reports. So we've had multiple things now that there's millions of dollars of taxpayers' money spent on getting reports. Sometimes the agency asked for 3 or 4 reports to be written, thousands of dollars every time, and they're not reading them. So now we've had that. Now we've had her interfere and the pricing arrangements everybody upset about. and not just everyone being providers, but actually participants who now can't access supports. I really think that it's a matter of days.
Wow. Okay. Watch this space, I guess. Let's just pull it back just for the last point to the SIL providers again, obviously the bulk of your business. We're hearing that there are a lot of SIL providers just shutting up shop as well. You were talking about support coordinators, but the SILs are also, so many of them are struggling just to keep operating. As you said, they're forking out a lot of staff costs, operational costs out of their own pocket because it's not being funded. What are you seeing in terms of businesses closing down?
Yeah, look, I'm seeing more acquisitions of SIL than I've ever seen. I think maybe in the last couple of years, I might have done 10 or 15 reviews of SIL businesses for acquisition, where now it seems like every week I'm looking at a business who is collapsing and another business taking it over. And they're not buying the business as such. They are just acquiring the clients because the business has no value because it's not profitable. So yeah, I don't have any data on it. I got the support coordination data from their peak body, but I don't, SIL doesn't have a peak body and I haven't got any clear data, but anecdotally, I'm seeing it happen constantly. I've had a number of my clients on both sides. I've had clients shut shop and I've had other clients being able to pick up multiple other houses. We've had some really large providers fall over, and that has also meant that there's been a lot of opportunity for some providers to pick up some of those houses. But it's really a consolidation because a lot of those houses aren't profitable because they might have, they might have one participant in them in a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom home. And just rehoming those participants and ensuring that they're happy is a real challenge. And getting that mix of participant mix is really quite a challenge as well. But it's definitely happening. It's a scary time to be a SIL provider. And I think that a lot of it comes down to really smart systems that can really find where the gaps are, where you're over-rostering or over-servicing, and really having to make some hard decisions about maybe saying goodbye to a house and saying goodbye to a participant. It comes down to this idea that not every participant is viable for every business to run. Larger businesses can afford to take a little bit of a hit short term because over the long term, it'll be a consistent income. But, the worst thing you can do as a SIL provider is open a house with one participant and just pray that somebody else is coming to join them on a 1-to-3 ratio. It's not viable. And I think when you add to that payment locks and payment freezes from the NDIS, have a payment freeze for 3 months when you're already on very thin margins, there's just not the cash buffer to continue.
The payment freeze was another thing I wanted to very quickly touch on too. So we're hearing SDA providers are having funds frozen for months on end. So of course the investors are not getting their income to pay their mortgages, but this is a payment freeze that's across the board.
Yeah, payment freezes. There's 2 stages. There's payment freezes and payment locks. So a payment lock is like a query. It's like the first stage when they're just seeing if something is wrong. They're doing a bit of an investigation, and we're led to believe that they are random, that they just happen at random, and there's a random sample that occurs every month inside the agency. And then if there's any risks are flagged within a provider, which could start at the plan manager or the support coordinator and might not be about the provider directly. I have seen, fruit from the poisonous tree analogy. I have seen a plan manager have every single invoice to every single provider locked. And that obviously has lock-on effects to every multiple providers who might not be flagged. And so we are seeing quite a lot of that as well. We've had a number of cases now in the court around it. It was found that the agency needs to be quicker with their responses, but they don't actually have a time frame. Where in other funding arrangements done by the government, like aged care, there's a number of days they have to review and pay things, but we don't have that in the current system. So, and it's not obviously at the agency's best interest, so they're not going to be lobbying to change that. But it just increases the risk to providers, the payment locks and payment freezes.
Yeah. Well, it does. It is in the agency's best interest at the end of the day, because without having viable providers running profitable businesses, how can the scheme even survive?
I honestly I honestly don't think that they care. I don't think they care about any individual business. I think we've got when the scheme rolled out in 2013 to 2019, it was a very different regulatory approach. They needed a demand-driven system. They needed enough providers on board to service the participants in the scheme. But now there's an oversupply of providers, and they know that if one goes down, someone else will just pick up the participants. They're not concerned about not having anyone deliver those supports. And so they just see it kind of as natural selection. It's whoever is the fittest will survive, and one will go down and 10 will go in their place is kind of how they see it. And it's a really devastating approach, because if you look at how many small and medium businesses we have in the space, if you look at how many are employed in disability, it actually is a really huge economic engine. People are employed, they can include low-level skilled people who otherwise might be on unemployment. And yet it is just seen as, it's been tarred for the last 18 months around this narrative of dodgy providers. And that's the narrative they're using to be very punitive in their approaches.
Yeah, look, definitely lots going on in the system. Interesting what you were talking about, the CEO. We will definitely keep an eye out for news in that front. But I think that covers it, Tania. Thank you so much. I just wanted to get your opinion, because you're so much on the ground with the providers and seeing the challenges they're going through, obviously from the auditing perspective, but also just operational and how they're managing to negotiate these issues in the industry at the moment. So a really good perspective. Thank you so much for bringing some of these issues to light. Did you have any last words you wanted to?
No, just thanks for having me. And I just wish everyone the best of luck in the current scheme. It's tough out there, and I think the only way we get through this is by supporting each other. So if there's something I can do to help, reach out. If there's someone out there you can see is struggling, help them. Even if you think they're competitors, help. Give everyone a little bit of a hand at the moment, because it really is a tough space and we do need to band together.
Absolutely. So Tania, how can someone find you?
Yeah, I'm on all the socials. It's just taniagomez.com.au or just at Tania Gomez on all of the socials. I'm always available and around for a chat if anyone's having any issues.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Tania. It's been such a pleasure having this chat, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.